Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne. Thank you for finding me once again in the crowded world of YouTube orchid videos. I am here to tell you I'm a complete amateur growing cold, cool, intermediate orchids in Melbourne, Australia without a greenhouse or grow lights or humidifiers or heating. Just me and them inside or outside, or we don't bother at all. So, plant lovers, if that sounds like your bag, do hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday and look forward to our continuing adventures, which today, ta-da, is actually part 2 of our Sarcochilus epic, which is Sarcochilus. So last week we visited Dan, a specialist Sarcochilus grower. So thank you very much once again, Dan, for your time and energy in letting me come and film. So great to see his collection. And I have to say that just that picture of those banks of different coloured Sarcochilus has kind of been the aim that I'm going for in terms of how my plants might look. And as you can see here, this isn't everything that's in bloom because there are still some things that haven't opened yet, but we are erring in a particular direction. So what I need to do is just loosen it up a little bit with some different types of flowers. Obviously yellow, orange and the speckles of that color group are going to be something that I should focus on, and I think perhaps more lighter pink and more speckles. Anyway, there's all sorts of beautiful colors here and I'm thrilled that they're all out. So I thought let's just do a recap of Sarcochilus. Some of the things that I've repotted, some of the seedlings that I bought, and some of the things we may learn and want to pick up from Dan's visit last week. And the other thing that Dan mentioned in our video last week was that he's not sure how well they do inside. So I am curious. I know there are lots of people in the States and in Britain, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, wanting and perhaps growing Sarcochilus. So if you're in a climate that they cannot survive outside all the time in, I'd love to know how successful you've been. So do leave some comments below if you're growing these in Britain or parts of America that have a colder winter where you can't grow them outside all the time. Let's share and let's see if you can in fact grow them successfully indoors. I'd be curious to know. Okay, so Sarcochilus 101. Firstly, they are almost completely exclusive to Australia, to the east coast of Australia. And I think there's 22 or 23 accepted species by Kew at the moment. And there is one species that also happily lives in New Guinea and New Caledonia, and I think the Solomon Islands as well, but that's the same species that's found in those parts, also found in Australia, so it's not unique to those islands. So it's a curious, very isolated group of orchids. I think not unrelated distantly to the Vanda, and Sarcochilus has been crossed quite successfully with certain species of Vandas to create quite interesting hybrids. Don't have any of those yet, but I would love to find them, and they are available in Australia. So that will be my next stop on the Sarcochilus train. So, an east coast of Australia group of plants. They are generally lithophytes or epiphytes, and I think it's important to define our terms here, like a good high school debater that I was, in that a lithophyte means lives on rocks. But I think it's important to understand that these things aren't just living on the rock, they're living on rocks, but in sort of nooks and crannies where moss and leaf detritus has collected. So there is a little bit of material and those plants are growing in that. So they're not sort of clinging to the rock like a limpet. So ditto with sort of epiphytes. There are some Sarcochilus, there are real clingers that do hang on a bit like Phalaenopsis. And then there are others that are sort of, again, growing in the nooks and crannies on trees where a little bit of leaf detritus has collected. So there's a little bit of a mix in terms of their habit. Now, I've made a few Sarcochilus videos, so we're just going to kind of gloss over some of the high points, but there are some orchids to follow up on, which I think is what we'll do today. But in a nutshell, I grow mine outside all year under cover. We can get quite cold winter minimums here in Melbourne, so the temperatures can get down to 2, 3, 4 degrees centigrade, which is between sort of 34 up to 40, 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, but not freezing. And here in the inner city of Melbourne, we don't really get frost, but mine are under cover and protected anyway. And that protection also means they're not being rained on, so I can control the amount of water they get. So in the wild, lithophytes, epiphytes, obviously the plant's ability to get water is opportunistic, depends when it rains. And particularly epiphytes, the water runs down the tree, trunk maybe collects a little bit in that detritus in the nook, and the roots have time to absorb the moisture before it does then evaporate and dry out, and then you have the period of waiting until it rains again. And the range of these orchids is quite broad, so lots of different climatic conditions and rain cycles, but often some of them can go for quite some periods of time without rain. So they are relatively, some of them, drought tolerant. And when I go on holiday, I don't worry about the Sarcochilus. I just leave them. Now, many of the Sarcochilus hybrids that you see in cultivation at the moment were all derived from this beauty here, which is called Sarcochilus hartmannii. So Sarcochilus hartmannii was described in 1874 by Baron Ferdinand von Müller, who was the founder of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. And it's named after a man called Carl Heinrich Hartmann, who collected the original type specimen from which the plant was named. Hence hartmannii. Now, as so many hybrids are derived from hartmannii, let's just see what the Bible of Australian orchids, the complete edition Orchids of Australia, W.H. Nichols, which is a book unfortunately out of print, quite expensive to find in the second-hand market, but I found this in a second-hand shop and it was relatively inexpensive. Lucky me. But let's see what W.H. Nichols has to say about hartmannii, which is that it grows in full sunshine on cliffs and rock ledges, or occasionally on the bark or the butts of trees, with its roots penetrating the top layer of leaves and soil. And the flowering period is September to November, and I am recording this in late October. So, interesting point, full sunshine and cliffs. Now, that is not coastal cliffs, that is inland cliffs, but in full sun. So that is, we'll get to why that's important in a minute, but many hybrids then derived from hartmannii do need the sun. Now, the negative with that is that with lots of sun, you're going to get amazing blooms, but you're also going to get leaf damage because you will get burnt spots. And if you see Australian orchids in the wild, the leaves are often in a terrible state. They're burnt, they're desiccated, they've been eaten. I mean, that's how it rolls. But the flowers are beautiful. So with my Sarcochilus, and as you saw with Dan's collection in last week's video, he has his in a shade house. I have mine where they do get quite strong morning light and they can get afternoon light depending on the season, but otherwise it's quite bright, indirect, filtered light. So if you're trying to grow them at home, that is what you kind of need to do. They do need direct sunlight, at least in the morning, and then maybe a bit of protection in the afternoon if you're somewhere with very strong sunlight. And if you're growing them indoors all the time, as I said, I'm not sure how they're going to go because I've never grown them indoors all the time. So you'll have to leave comments below as to what your tips and tricks are for growing hartmannii and its relatives inside. So some of the seedlings that I bought in a bit of a frenzy over the last year or so have included this one because I really wanted to try and get that sort of lemony yellow color into my spectrum of colors. And as you can see, that one is basically a white flower with what we call that, sort of like a tangerine inside to the lip. And this one is Sarcochilus amber Mandarin crossed with Coolendel rich round yellow. Goodness me, there are so many hybrids. I think you kind of almost don't need to worry about the name, but more just look at the color that you're interested in and the form. So you'll find that some flowers are quite round, and in other flowers the petals are more diamond shaped and the flowers quite open, and some have more upright racemes and some are much more pendant. So there's quite a variety. So maybe choose the plant you're interested in really based on the color and the form of the flower, I would. Now, not really a fragrance, but that species falcatus that Dan had in last week's video, which is a smaller plant with basically a white flower, the little colour to the lip, that did have the most beautiful vanilla ice cream smell. It literally smelled like spilled ice cream, which took me back to my 70s childhood, where there were often spilled ice creams. But most of these, really nothing at all. I mean, if you get really close, there's a slight fragrance and it's not unpleasant, it's quite lovely, but it's really super dialed down. So not really a plant to buy for fragrance. Now, let's check up on something that I repotted. Now, here is one that I bought at an orchid group's sale about a year ago. And this one I wanted to buy because it had a very red flower, as you can see there. And that little sunny center, very beautiful. Now, it perhaps wasn't in the best condition. Now, if you look there, can you see those two leaves? Someone in one of my videos did ask me about the longevity of Sarcochilus leaves and whether you should or shouldn't be anxious about them turning yellow. Well, if we look at this plant, I am not anxious that these are turning yellow. The leaves don't die that often. I mean, the leaves of a Sarcochilus will literally last for years. So you should perhaps only ever get one leaf a year, depending on the age of the plant, that might turn up its toes and go yellow and die effectively. And obviously what you want is the oldest leaves at the bottom of the plant to be the ones that are turning. If you are getting discoloration at the crown of the plant, the top there, then there's something else going on, and that could be too much light, which could actually really change the color. It could be an issue with watering, it could be an issue with feeding, or it could be something sinister, who knows. So if your leaves are turning yellow at the base and then turning brown and dropping off, not a problem. If it's from the top of the plant, it is a problem, and you've got to, by the process of elimination, figure out what's going on. Now, I also repotted this one in a loosish mix of medium bark and a bit of perlite in this case. I often recycle my old bark potting mix from orchids that I potted which died quite quickly, which unfortunately is quite a lot. So that's basically new potting medium, and I don't want to waste it. So I have a bucket of sort of upcycled bark mix really, which can sometimes have a bit of sphagnum, a bit of perlite, a bit of this, bit of that. And I just use that because I find my Sarcochilus aren't fussy. As we saw in Dan's video, he's very particular and only uses bark and a particular brand of bark and nothing else. So no perlite or sphagnum or anything else. And his orchids, of course, look fabulous. But this is the thing, everyone must find their own way. So really, whatever works for you. And I have also used out of the bag potting mix, which is a larger bark piece with a bit more granulation into the mix, which again, a lot of my orchids are potted in that and they've done quite well. So as I said before, there isn't just one way to grow these orchids. You've got to figure out what works well for you. Either way though, it needs to be a loose, free draining mix like many other orchids. But back to this one, it has done well. So we have got two new growth points here, this one and this one. And it was a little desiccated when I bought it, but the leaves have really plumped up well, and we got two flower spikes to get a sense that the flowers are a really lovely sort of burgundy actually. They haven't fully opened yet. So that's one of the seedlings I bought, as was this one, the yellow one here. And that also has done very well with very vigorous growth and a second growth point coming out of the back of the plant here, which is good. And that illustrates the point. Sarcochilus are very vigorous and you will get a flower very, very quickly from your seedling stage. And this is the plant that Dan very kindly gave me in last week's video. And as you can see, this is a seedling and this is probably year 2, year 3. And we've got a flower spike. So very quick to flower and very quick to bulk up and make quite large plants. Now perhaps the only negative is that they only flower once a year for a very tight window, late winter to spring. It depends where you are in Australia. Some will bloom earlier if they're further north and etc. There are some species that flower at different times, but generally the hybrids derived from hartmannii are all going to flower at this time of year. So you kind of get a couple of weeks of mad, beautiful mixed colour and then nothing. So you've got to be, I guess, committed to that. But they're not massive plants and they are quite easy to just take care of them, leave to their own devices when they're not in bloom. So yeah, that's the negative for me, is that they only bloom once. But when they do, look at this. Now, this is a Sarcochilus that I made a repotting video about, which I'll link. Basically called Red. Now look at that, isn't that stunning? And it is covered, how many spikes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flower spikes on that plant. Absolutely gorgeous. And there's the lovely red flowers. Now what this illustrates really well with the Sarcochilus flower is the back of the flower is often speckled and mottled. And when your buds appearing, you'll basically see, as perhaps you can see on the end of this raceme here. So you see those buds at the end. They look white with a little dot of colour and you think, oh, that's not the flower I want. It's not the flower in the picture, but that is the back of the petals and sepals basically. As you can see, they're quite mottled and different. So when the flower opens, who knows, you've got to wait and see. But this one is a solid, beautiful red. So this was the plant that I repotted in that video now a couple of years ago, and it's doing really well. And I think too, what this plant illustrates, as you can see there, you see that very sort of drapey, elongated habit that the stem is starting to form. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to the show of the Native Australian Species Society to see their show of local orchids, which is beautiful. And there were some amazing specimens of Sarcochilus, and one of them was huge, and it was in a really wide, shallow pan. And if you look at this stem here, so imagine that stem twice, 3 times as long, times sort of 10. So the plant was just draping and hanging over the side of the pot, and it was covered in flowers, and I just fell in love with that form. So this is why I'm not dividing anything, because I just want those really large specimen plants hanging over the side like a weird succulent covered in flowers in spring. The other thing we covered in our visit to Dan was feeding. So pretty similar regime to mine. He uses a slow release fertilizer, and then he uses a liquid based fertilizer throughout the growing season. So not dissimilar to me, and dials it completely down in winter, which is what I do as well. But this is a plant that does grow throughout the year. So it is a plant that needs both watering and, if you want, a little bit of a liquid tonic such as seaweed-based solutions or worm juice or whatever through the winter period, but really not heavy feeding in winter. But these orchids do not have pseudobulbs, so it is not a plant that wants to dry out or have any sort of rest in winter. It does need to be watered. But there you are, that's the fertilizing regime. And now a little follow-up on another orchid that I bought not that long ago from a plant fair, and I was just laughing with myself and you that did I really need another Sarcochilus in my life? But look at that. It is a very, very different, well, it's not that different. Come on, Matthew, but anyway. To me, it seems like quite a different form of flower and plant. It's very, very beautiful. And this is a cross between Sarcochilus fitzgeraldii, which is a species, and Sarcochilus Riverdene, which is a primary cross. So it's a cross between two species. So Riverdene is a cross between Sarcochilus hartmannii and another much more tropical Sarcochilus called Sarcochilus Judith. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that's from northeast Queensland. So very much in the tropical end of Australia. So that is 3 very different climatic types. We've got hartmannii further south, which loves full sun and lives in rocky areas. We've got Judith, which is a shady loving tropical plant, and fitzgeraldii. Now, let me read you what the Bible of Australian Orchids says about fitzgeraldii. This is pure poetry. It says, Sarcochilus fitzgeraldii is an exceedingly graceful, free-flowering orchid. Fortunate indeed are those who have been able to visit its haunts, where it scrambles over the rocks to a length of as much as 120 centimetres or 4 feet. Often in great profusion, its habit is pendulous. The racemes of showy flowers are thus seen to full advantage. The ravine orchid's home, which is the common name for fitzgeraldii, is a secluded one, well sheltered by giant trees, palms, vines, ferns, and other vegetation. Doesn't that sound like paradise? But what it does sound, to me, is shady. So yes, this is a southern species, but it likes shadier spots, so much more of a delicate constitution than its cousin over here, hartmannii. So here we have an interesting conundrum then. So we've got a plant that has 3 species parents, one of which likes full sun, one of which is a shadier, moister grower, and one of which comes from shady but tropical conditions. My oh my, there's a mixed bag of heritage and DNA. So what I've done is I've decided to grow it still outside, under cover all year, but I'm growing it in shade. So as it's suggested in the book about fitzgeraldii, it is sort of more pendulous, although not necessarily any more pendulous than any of these other ones, I think. But what I'm doing is hanging it up, and I am hanging it under a series of other things, so it is really, really sheltered and dappled. It does get a little bit of light, direct morning light, but otherwise much shadier than all the others. And they are really the most beautiful, delicate, open flowers with these little soft splodges of mauve on a white background with quite a yellow lip. Anyway, it's a beautiful, beautiful orchid. So I'm pleased that it bloomed. When I did buy it a couple of months ago now, it did have the beginnings of flower spikes. So not a surprise that it's opened, but I'm glad that it has. Not massively floriferous. I mean, there's 3... there are 3 spikes, but there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 growth points on it. So it could do a little better, I think. But anyway, let's see how we go next year under my complete care. So there we are, plant lovers. I think there are still gaps in the collection. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I do think I need more yellow, orange and speckles in my life. I do feel if there is a bright orange, and I know Dan had a fantastic orange one, and perhaps more pink, real pinky pink, soft pinks, just to break it up. Anyway, I still have quite a few seedlings that haven't bloomed. So I bought a batch of seedlings at a different fair and repotted all of those. None of them produced spikes this year, which I was a little disappointed in. But then again, I only repotted them quite recently and they all look like they are perhaps second year seedlings, or they could even be second year divisions. So I'm not that disappointed, but perhaps next year we'll have an even more interesting array of Sarcochilus to look at and see how I've gone. So I am now on a moratorium of Sarcochilus buying. This is a very beautiful pendulous white, very open flowers. I love that. What's this one called? It's called Judith Snowy. There you are, Sarcochilus Judith Snowy. Let me show you Judith more. Look at that. Isn't that elegant? So beautiful. Loving that. It's a very large open flower. Anyway, moratorium until I have seen everything open. Then I can decide if there are a few more colour gaps in my life. And maybe I need to talk to Dan, because he is the king of colour in Sarcochilus and he'll know exactly where to get what I'm looking for. But anyway, plant lovers, I hope you've enjoyed our two-part Sarcochilus epic. I think we've covered everything, but if you have any questions, do put them in the comments below. And if you are growing them successfully indoors in other parts of the world where you can't grow them outside because of the cool temperatures in winter, let us know. I'm sure there are many people who'd like to know how best they could grow Sarcochilus inside. So plant lovers, many, many thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Who knows what it will be, but it won't be Sarcochilus. We'll have to wait for another year. But until then, I look forward very much to seeing you next week. Take care.